couple days ago, I came down, I'd say, pretty hard on the next gentleman we're going to be talking to, and that's the Democratic chair of the Michigan Party, Brandon Dillon, on some tweets that he tweeted out after Governor Snyder spoke in front of the Grand Rapids Economic Club. I asked him to come on air to address not only those tweets, but also the new Flint Water Task Force report that came on yesterday, and he graciously agreed to do so. So I appreciate that very much. Let's start the day with the Democratic chair of the Michigan Party, Brandon Dillon. Thank you, Brandon, for coming on air.
I knew my ears were burning for some reason the other day, so I'm sorry I missed the show, but I'm happy to be on.
I appreciate you coming on and addressing it, and I'm upfront and honest. I did come down after those tweets and was very concerned about. Well, we'll get into that. I guess the let's start with that, and then we'll get to the Flint Water Task Force report and your response to it. After the Grand Rapids Economic Club speech, where Governor Snyder received a standing ovation, you tweeted two tweets about the only place anyone in the world, about any place anyone in the world would clap for him. Big Money still loves @OneToughNerd. All right, I was okay with that. But then you wrote this, or tweeted this. Questions for the sycophants at the Grand Rapids Econ Club cheering for Snyder. Do you feel any shame standing for a guy that let kids drink poison H2O? And my remark was that's really, really mean and almost evil in a way. And now I understand your goal as the Michigan's Democratic chair of the party is to get Democrats elected. But my concern, and this would go on either side of any aisle or with any political party, how do you, when you make tweets like that, the second one, how do you expect people like us who are the citizens of Michigan who vote to think that you guys will ever work together when comments are made like that?
Well, first of all, I don't see anything wrong with the comment. The governor's task force that came out yesterday confirmed the fact that this was an environmental injustice, that the responsibility for people in Flint drinking poison water primarily rests with the governor, despite the fact that he's tried to spread accountability to other people. And the report also suggests that the governor perjured himself in his testimony in Congress last week, where he said he didn't know anything about the lead issue until late September of 2015. And the task force report says that there were discussions in June and July. So, I'm from Grand Rapids. I was absolutely disgusted that people would sit there and clap for him right after the fact that he declined to meet with 5 families in Flint face-to-face. He's eager to go stand in front of a bunch of business people in Grand Rapids, but when families in Flint ask him to talk to them, he couldn't be bothered. So I think it's entirely appropriate. I think most people agree with it.
Well, would you believe then that you just perjured yourself because the report said the most of the blame goes to the MDEQ, not the governor? The report specifically said that it went to the MDEQ.
I don't know that I'm under subpoena power or under oath.
Well, okay, you got. I understand
the responsibility, the governor has said repeatedly, and even more so since he spent millions of dollars hiring PR firms, that this was a failure of government at all levels. The report specifically contradicts that and says that the state has the primary responsibility for this. And not only does the MDEQ, which the governor is essentially the head of because he's top on the organizational chart in the administration, but also his political appointees. So, if you want to parse words and say that the governor's not responsible because it was the DEQ, the governor, in 2010 when he was running for governor, Renk, said that he didn't want the DEQ to be an enforcement agency anymore. It should be a compliance agency to help businesses with customer service rather than protect public health. So he's entirely responsible for it.
I'm not trying to parse words. My thought is and I've always said this, the responsibility is first on the Flint City Water Division. Why were those guys getting... Hold on, let me finish, and then I'll let you respond.
The task force said that's not the case.
Flint City Water Division, because they're paid to know what they're doing, number one. I said it was on the MDEQ for not forcing the Flint City Water Division to understand what their job is. The EPA for not picking up where the MDEQ failed and Flint failed. And Governor Snyder has always taken responsibility for his account of this. And I say fine, because then on what you're saying, Brandon, is that it is also President Obama's fault. Because his EPA, who he picks, he chooses, the people he picks, did not enforce the MDEQ. But so that's what I've always said. But
I'm only going to go back to the task force.
Okay.
The governor handpicked this task force. It was co-chaired by the former Senate Republican Majority Leader, Ken Sikkema. Their conclusions, unfortunately, do not comport with what you're saying. They blame specifically the emergency manager law and the fact that citizens in Flint did not have the power to be able to control their own destiny. They put the blame squarely on the DEQ, and rightfully so. The EPA does share some responsibility for not sounding the alarm earlier. But his task force that he appointed and accepted says that the blame lays primarily and squarely with Governor Snyder and his administration.
I'd like to see that because I didn't read that in the report. I read it that it blamed squarely on the MDEQ with the governor taking responsibility. But back to my original question, how are people, if that's the feeling of the representatives in the Democrat representatives in Michigan, how do we think that you guys are going to work together? And I would be asking
your question is fundamentally flawed. It's not the view of Democrats in Michigan. It's the view of the Republican task force that he put together, which came to that conclusion. So if you want to say that that's a partisan issue, you're entitled to do that. But the facts say otherwise. Ken Sikkema is not a partisan Democrat.
I'm not talking about the task force.
Republican.
I'm not talking. On air with me is the Democratic Party's chair of the here in Michigan, Brandon Dillon. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your tweet saying that, do you feel any shame standing for a guy that let kids drink poison H2O? That's what I'm talking about, not the task force. So how are people citizens of Michigan, supposed to think that you guys will work together with this kind of
well, I don't
statements?
think I don't think it's inconsistent to demand accountability and be outraged by the responses of people to this, and have people work together. Use bipartisan bills in Congress, in the Senate, to help get money to Flint to get those pipes out of the ground. There's been Democrats and Republicans trying to do things in Lansing together to get resources there. But one of the problems with Congress right now getting the money to Flint is that one of the presidential candidates, Senator Ted Cruz, and also a Republican senator from Utah, have put a hold on that legislation. So there are people working together. It's not mutually exclusive to hold people accountable and show outrage and then work towards having a solution going forward. But accountability is critical to this.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you, Brandon.
The task force, Renk, it basically answered two questions. How and what happened, right? But it didn't say why. And it left that open. And that's a critical question to make sure that whoever's governor, whoever controls the legislature, whoever controls the DEQ going forward, does not make the same critical mistakes that were made by this governor and his appointees.
I don't have a problem with it. I'm number one at keeping people accountable. There's not enough of it in politics. But let me ask you this. Do you and the Michigan Democrat Party elected officials really believe that Governor Snyder knew of the actual problem in Flint and purposefully poisoned the people of Flint? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what we're saying. We're not saying that he purposely poisoned the people of Flint. But as the task force suggested, this was a case of environmental injustice where there was indifference to the people in Flint, and the style of government that the governor imposed on Flint through the emergency manager contributed to this. There were many warning signs. I can't imagine in Battle Creek or in Grand Rapids if citizens came to a city council meeting or city commission meeting holding up jugs of brown water that smelled like urine for 6 to 8 months, that people wouldn't be outraged. And unfortunately, that happened in Flint for 18 months, and this governor didn't act. Did he do it on purpose? Absolutely not.
I understand it, but your tweet saying, do you have any shame for a guy that the word let kids drink poison H2O means purposefully?
Well, the facts speak for themselves. Kids in Flint drank poisoned water for almost 2 years. Warning signs were there, and the governor's own task force suggests that he knew far about the lead problem far in advance of when he said he did. I'm a resident of Grand Rapids. I was ashamed that people in my city would applaud this governor for his role in this crisis. Whether he did it purposefully or not, the results are the same.
Well, I understand that, and
lives are irreparably damaged.
I understand that, Brandon, and you could feel that way. It's the way that you worded it, because words matter. So let me ask you this: what does environmental justice mean to you, or at least to the task force in the way they put it? Because there were non-whites.
The task force says that it's not about intent; it's about outcomes. And the fact that this was a poor community, these are the words of the task force, and former Senator Sickler, the fact that these residents were poor, largely minority, disadvantaged, that is a case of environmental injustice that probably would not have happened in a community with different demographics and different income levels. Does it mean that the governor did it on purpose because of that? No. But environmental injustice refers to outcomes for different communities and disparate impacts between a city like Flint and someplace else that is more affluent. And I think that the task force is right on.
Let me ask you this. Does State Senator Renk and State Representative Neely have any responsibility for not assuring that the right protocols were in place for that switchover? I mean, that was their constituents. That was their districts. Why did they not inquire about the right that Flint had the right or Michigan had the right protocols in place to not even know that you should put anti-corrosive material like Detroit was doing? So are they to blame too?
No, not at all. I mean, legislators are not the executive. They do not have the function of the administration. But I will tell you this. I know Representative Neely, upon being elected in January of 2015, sent a letter immediately to the governor expressing his concerns. And the governor's spokesperson at the time, who's since been fired, Dave Murray, laughed it off because he sent it to the wrong email address. Senator Ananick has dozens of emails that he was sending to the administration raising concerns and questions. So, I mean, to try to suggest that a legislator in the minority in the Michigan legislature bears any responsibility for what is essentially an executive function, I think is a real stretch.
Well, I'm just saying because it's their district. That's why I'm saying it. Because if I had in my district, I would make sure that the right protocols were in place to do that. So you don't feel that your tweet saying, do you feel any shame saying for a guy that let kids drink poison H2O, you feel that's okay and it's appropriate?
Yes.
Okay, so then when you were a state rep, and Governor Granholm was in office, and
when she was in office,
I thought you were in the last year of hers.
Mm-mm.
No, okay. Well, I'll take you out. When Governor Granholm was in office, she presided over the destruction of Detroit's school system, not only from a financial but an academic perspective. So would it have been okay for the chair of Michigan's Republican Party to tweet out, quote, questions for the sycophant Democrats in Michigan cheering for Granholm? Do you feel any shame standing for a woman that let kids in such a toxic and poisonous environment? You would have been okay with that.
They probably did it.
No, I looked and I didn't see anything.
Comparing the situation at Detroit Public Schools, as tragic as it is, and as longstanding as the problems are, to the situation in Flint, and the health damage that will be done to these kids for a long time it's just not appropriate.
Well, I understand.
There were a lot of Democrats who were critical of things that Governor Granholm did at the time, and a lot of Republicans. And the fact of the matter is, this is the worst environmental disaster probably in the state's history, and even potentially in the country's history. And it is man-made. It was caused by indifference and decisions made by this governor and his administration, and his own task force came to those conclusions.
I understand that, Brandon. My concern is about the hyperbole that's being put out there and the wording. It doesn't take away. We don't have to sit there and say, because I question this type of saying that the governor did it on purpose. Because when you use the word let, what is the word? Well, let's not do a Clintonian. And what does the word let mean?
But I mean, it suggests indifference.
All right.
It suggests being there and not, here's what I've said, and I don't think anybody can dispute this. This crisis happened. The governor is either not telling the truth about what he knew and when he knew it, and his testimony in Congress I think, suggests that he is not telling the truth based on the task force report, or he is one of the worst, if not the worst, manager in the history of the state. Either way, it's not good.
I understand, and then I guess you would also say that. And again, I'm just trying to draw comparisons because President Obama chose the head of the EPA, who failed the state of Michigan, and the state of Michigan failed the people of Flint. So the same words, then I believe, my opinion, could be used against the president. Now, I wouldn't use those words. I don't blame the president.
I mean, look, again,
because
I know you have to kind of try to draw these comparisons, but I just would refer back to the task force. They said that's not the case. The EPA does bear responsibility, but the way environmental law works in this country, the EPA is an oversight agency. They should have sounded the alarm. But primacy rests with the DEQ and all the other state Department of Environmental Quality.
I would agree.
Country.
I would agree with that.
They bear blame. The people in Flint will tell you the EPA did not do the job they should have done. There's no doubt about it.
I understand.
But to suggest that the accountability is equivalent is just not borne out by the
I didn't say
facts.
equivalent. I said that it would actually be, we can draw a comparison like that because, as an executive, which the governor is and the president is, they have many things on their plate.
I mean, if you can show me, if there is no evidence and no Republican has suggested that President Obama was being sent emails and warning signs about this the same way Governor Snyder was.
I agree.
For 2 years while people walked into city commission meetings with jugs of dirty, filthy water with E. coli. I mean, look, we haven't even talked about the Legionnaires outbreak. 10 people died. I mean, this is enough to suggest that the governor was, at the very least, asleep at the switch. And when you're asleep at the switch, you let things happen. That's why, to go back to your original point, the tweet and the comments, I think, are entirely appropriate. These things happen because of his inaction and his indifference, and because of the emergency manager he put in place that was not accountable to the people, but only accountable to the bottom line.
All right. Well, I guess in the future we can talk about the emergency management issue. But I do appreciate you really coming on air and addressing this issue with all of us. Thank you very much.
I'm happy to come on anytime, so give me a call.
Appreciate that. That was Democrat chair of the party here in Michigan, Brandon Dillon.